My son threw me out of the house and tossed my suitcase into the snow, saying, "You're just a burden, Mom, go away." But under the bridge my brother found me and helped me get everything back. The winter that year came down heavy, the kind of cold that makes even your bones ache. Snow had piled up against the porch rails, hard and glittering under the street lamp. I remember standing at the kitchen window that evening, watching the flakes dance and drift, thinking how quiet the world looked under all that white. I never imagined that by the time the night was over, I would be out in it with nowhere to go. My son, my only boy, stood across from me in the living room. His face was set in that stubborn way he had since childhood, but there was no boy in him anymore, only a hard edge that I couldn't recognize. He didn't raise his voice, didn't shout like you see in the movies. No, he spoke with the calm cruelty of someone who had already made up his mind. "You're just a burden, Ma," he said. His words came out flat, cold as the wind rattling the window panes. "I can't keep doing this. You've got nothing left to give." I thought for a moment that I'd misheard him. This was my son, the same little boy I once held against my chest when he was feverish, the one who used to slip his small hand into mine on icy sidewalks. I wanted to laugh it off, tell him not to be ridiculous, but the look in his eyes stopped me. It was distant, closed off. He meant it. "I raised you here," I whispered, but my voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone else. "This is my house." He waved a hand, impatient, as though I were some stubborn child arguing past bedtime. "Not anymore. Just go. You'll figure something out." The words stung sharper than any slap. My chest ached. Not from the winter chill, but from something far colder. I looked around at the familiar room, the worn armchair by the fire, the Afghan I'd crocheted during long winter evenings, the photographs lining the mantel. Each one told the story of my life, of his life. And yet he wanted me gone. When I didn't move quickly enough, he opened the front door. A rush of icy air swept inside, curling around my thin ankles. My coat was hanging on the rack by the door, but he didn't hand it to me. I had to take it myself, fumbling with the buttons as my hands trembled. It wasn't much of a coat anymore, thin wool with a fraying hem. No match for the bitter wind waiting outside. I stepped onto the porch. My breath puffed white, hanging in the air like smoke. Behind me, the door shut with a sharp finality. That sound cut deeper than the cold. I turned once, just once, to see the warm yellow glow of my home spilling through the curtains. The shape of him passed by the window, then vanished into the back of the house. And that was the last glimpse I had. My son safe and warm inside, while I stood out in the snow, the crunch of ice under my shoes and nothing but darkness ahead. I started down the front walk slowly, my knees stiff from the chill, each step heavier than the last. My thin boots slipped on the icy patches, and I clutched the railing until it ended. The snow was piled high against the hedges, and the street beyond looked endless, quiet except for the distant hum of a car engine. I wanted to scream, to pound on the door and beg him to take it back, but there was no strength left in me for fighting. He had already closed his heart, and what's the use of shouting at a closed door? Instead, I wrapped my coat tighter around me and kept walking. The night air bit at my cheeks, and the wind slipped under my collar, sharp as knives. I thought of my warm bed, of the quilt I had stitched by hand, lying neatly folded at the foot of it. I thought of the kettle on the stove, the way the steam curled like soft ribbons when I poured a cup of tea. All of it was still inside that house, but I no longer belonged there. Every breath I took came out ragged, clouding in the air before me. The snow crunched under my shoes, muffled yet steady, as though marking time with each weary step. I told myself not to cry. The tears would only freeze on my face, and besides, what good would they do now? The betrayal cut deeper than the wind. It wasn't just the house I had lost that night. It was my son. The boy I had once rocked to sleep, the child I had prayed for, worked for, sacrificed for. How quickly he had forgotten. Or maybe he remembered and didn't care. The city lights shimmered faintly in the distance. Somewhere out there were people laughing, families gathered around dinner tables, fires burning in hearths. And there I was, an old woman alone on the icy street, cast out like an unwanted coat. Still my feet carried me forward. One step then another, because what else was there to do? The night swallowed me whole as I left the porch behind. Snowflakes clung to my lashes, melted, and ran down my cheeks like tears I hadn't let myself cry. The streets were slick, glazed over with ice, and every step felt like a gamble. My shoes, old leather ones with soles worn thin, slipped against the frozen sidewalk. I kept one hand trailing along fences and telephone poles, just to steady myself. The city had a strange stillness that night. It was the kind of quiet you only hear in winter, when the snow seems to muffle everything. Far down the block, windows glowed with soft light. Behind those curtains were families gathered close, the smell of stews simmering, the warmth of laughter. I could almost hear it, muffled by glass, distant as a dream. But no one knew my story. To them, I was just another bundled figure trudging along the icy street. Invisible. Forgotten. It's funny how memory works, sweetheart. As I walked past those houses, I remembered other winters years ago when that same boy, my son, was small enough to hold my hand. We'd come into town for Christmas shopping, his cheeks red from the cold, his mitten slipping from my grasp as he darted toward toy displays. He used to press his nose to the bakery window, watching the frosting swirl on gingerbread men. Back then, his eyes had shone with wonder. Back then he needed me. Now his words echoed in my head with every step. You're just a burden. I pulled my coat tighter around me. It wasn't enough. The wind whistled down the street, sharp and merciless, slipping through the gaps at my collar. I felt it in my chest, deep in the joints of my knees. Each step seemed heavier than the last, my breath coming out in small white puffs, the air stinging my lungs. I passed storefronts, their windows dressed up for the season, red ribbons, painted snowmen, shimmering garlands. They looked warm and inviting, like little stages for a play I wasn't allowed to join. Once upon a time I would have stopped, gone inside, bought a small trinket for my son, maybe a peppermint stick. But now I just kept walking. The windows glowed, but none of them were meant for me. The streets grew quieter the farther I went. The holiday lights strung across lampposts blinked cheerfully, but they felt mocking, as if they were celebrating for everyone but me. I could hear the crunch of my shoes on the snow, the occasional hiss of a car passing by. Drivers didn't glance my way. Why would they? To them, I was just another shadow on the edge of the street. It's a strange feeling being unseen. You spend your life pouring yourself into others, cooking their meals, washing their clothes, staying up when they're sick, working late so there's enough money for school shoes. And one day suddenly it's as if you never existed. The world keeps spinning, the windows keep glowing. But you are nothing more than an old woman walking alone at night. I passed by a park bench half buried in snow. For a moment I considered sitting down just to rest my legs. But the cold warned me. If you stop too long you may never rise again. So I pressed on, though my knees ached and my toes had gone numb inside my shoes. The city stretched ahead like an endless road. Street after street, house after house, all filled with people who belong somewhere. Me nowhere. I remembered the times when I'd walked these same streets with purpose. When my husband was alive, we'd stroll after supper, arm in arm, peeking into shop windows and pointing out silly things neither of us needed but both enjoyed imagining. Later, when I was raising my boy, we'd hurry through these sidewalks, my hands full of grocery bags, his small voice chattering beside me. Back then I had a place. I had purpose. Now my feet dragged across the frozen pavement, and I felt invisible. At one corner I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a lamppost. The metal was icy, biting against my palm even through my glove. I tilted my head back, watching the snow swirl under the yellow glow of the light. It looked almost beautiful, like glitter against the black sky. For a moment I let myself pretend I was simply out for a stroll, heading home to a warm fire and a waiting cup of tea. But the illusion shattered as soon as I looked around and saw nothing waiting for me but the long, empty street. I started walking again, slower this time. My legs felt heavier, as though the snow itself had crept into my bones. I passed a diner, its windows steamed with warmth, the clatter of dishes and hum of voices spilling faintly into the night. For one aching second I considered going inside. Just for a coffee. Just to be somewhere warm. But when I checked my pockets I remembered. I hadn't brought my purse. I had nothing. Not even enough for a cup of coffee. So I kept going. The city was alive around me, yet I was apart from it, as though moving through a dream. The sidewalks grew emptier the deeper into the night I walked. My breath came out harsher now, rattling in my chest. My hands were stiff, my fingers clumsy. But I pressed forward step by step, the way one must when there's no choice but to keep moving. Loneliness pressed on me heavier than the snow. I thought of my son, warm in that house I'd built, the same house that now shut me out. I thought of the years I had given him, the sacrifices he would never know, never care to know. And still the cruelest thought was this. If I disappeared into the snow that night, no one would notice until morning. And so I walked, invisible and weary, slipping along frozen sidewalks while the city glittered and laughed without me. By the time my legs gave out, the city had grown dark and hollow. My breath rattled in my chest like a broken bellows, each inhale stinging my throat. I don't know how long I walked. Hours maybe. The streets blurred together. Snow-packed sidewalks, shuttered storefronts, rows of houses glowing with lights I couldn't reach. My knees ached, my feet felt swollen inside my shoes, and the cold had crept so deep into me I could hardly feel my fingertips. At last I stumbled down an underpass, where the city's main street split above into a bridge. The air there smelled of damp wool, smoke, and something faintly sour like wet cardboard. I might have turned back if I'd had the strength, but my legs carried me no farther. I found myself among them, the others. Men and women huddled in a cluster beneath the bridge, their backs pressed against concrete, their shapes wrapped in old blankets and coats that had long since lost their warmth. One man sat hunched over a small fire contained in a tin can, the flames licking the night air. Another figure stirred something in a dented pot that looked like soup. The flicker of the firelight made their faces seem hollow, marked by hardship, skin weathered by more winters than I dared to count. No one looked startled to see me. That was the strange part. They just glanced up, then back down again, as though I were nothing unusual, just another soul who'd lost her place in the world and come to rest here a while. I found a spot near the wall, my back to the cold stone. My legs trembled as I sank down, grateful to be off my feet. My thin coat was no barrier against the chill that seeped up from the concrete, but at least I was no longer moving. At least I could breathe. "Cold night," a voice said. I looked up. A woman sat not far from me, wrapped in an oversized man's coat, her hair tucked under a knit cap. She held out a dented tin cup, steam rising faintly from it. "Soup," she said simply. I hesitated. Pride is a stubborn thing, even when you're shivering under a bridge. But my stomach answered before my voice could. I took the cup in both hands, grateful for the warmth seeping into my palms. The soup was thin, watery, with a taste I couldn't place. Maybe canned beans, maybe cabbage boiled down. But it was food, and in that moment it was the best thing I'd ever swallowed. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice breaking. She nodded and pulled her coat tighter. No questions asked. No pity in her eyes. Just the quiet understanding of someone who had walked the same hard road. Around us the night pressed close. The bridge above groaned with the weight of cars, their headlights sweeping shadows across the underpass. The others settled into themselves, curling against the walls, their breaths rising in faint white clouds. Some muttered in their sleep, others coughed into their blankets. It was a chorus of the forgotten, carried on the winter air. I pulled my coat around me and tucked my knees up, trying to make myself small. The sounds of the city faded, leaving only the crackle of the little fire and the whisper of snow falling beyond the bridge. I thought of my warm bed, of the quilt stitched with my own hands, of the pillow that still held the faint scent of lavender. All of it felt like another life, something belonging to someone else. I closed my eyes, though sleep was slow to come. My body shivered with each gust of wind that found its way through the cracks. I thought of my son. His face rose in my mind, sharp and clear. I tried to remember the little boy he once was, the way he'd run down the hallway in his socks, sliding across the floor with laughter spilling from his lips. I tried to picture the boy who had once clung to my skirts, who had cried when I left him at school on his first day. But those memories blurred against the man who had looked at me with cold eyes and told me I was nothing but a burden. Somewhere in the night, someone began to sing. Low, soft, cracked with weariness. A hymn, I think, though the words faltered. Others hummed along, their voices weaving together in the dark. For a moment, the underpass felt less like a place of despair and more like a shelter, a fragile circle of warmth against the cold world outside. I curled tighter into myself, clutching the memory of that sound. It reminded me that even in the harshest places, a spark of humanity could flicker. Still, the shivers never left me. I dozed in fits, waking often when a car rumbled overhead or when the cold bit too deep into my bones. My dreams were strange, half memory, half fear. I dreamed I was knocking on the door of my own house, but no one answered. I dreamed I was carrying my son again, but he slipped from my arms and vanished into the snow. I sat there, stiff from the night, my breath still fogging in the air. My fingers ached so badly I had to curl them one by one just to coax a little warmth back into them. The others stirred around me, an old man coughing into his blanket, a young woman rubbing her arms, muttering about how she hadn't slept a wink. Life went on in its weary way. I thought to myself, so this is it. This is where I've landed, after all the years of working, saving, caring, raising. Cast out, and now just another soul shivering in the shadows. I might have stayed in that thought if not for the sound, footsteps crunching on snow. A voice familiar in a way that made my heart stop. "Morning, folks," the voice called. I looked up. There he was. My brother, Samuel. I hadn't seen him in years, not since he'd climbed his way into the life of wealth he had now. He was the younger one, always full of fire, always certain he was meant for something bigger than the rest of us. And he had made it, too, a millionaire with estates and businesses I never fully understood. But he'd never forgotten the poor. That was his habit, his one grace. He gave back, handing out blankets, hot meals, supplies to those who had nothing. That's why he was here. That's why his boots crunched on the snow beneath the bridge that morning, his arms full of bags. I froze, clutching my thin coat around me, praying he wouldn't see me. Not like this. Not among these people, hunched and ragged. I lowered my head, tried to make myself small, invisible. But brothers, they know you. Even through years, even through shadows. "Mary." His voice cracked, sharp with disbelief. I looked up. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. The bag slid from his arm, landing in the snow with a dull thud. He stumbled forward, his eyes wide. "Good Lord," he whispered. "Mary." I wanted to tell him not to look at me. Not like this, with my hair matted from the night, my cheeks raw from the cold, my body shrunken into a coat too thin for the weather. I wanted to tell him I was fine, that it was nothing, that he should move along. But when his arms wrapped around me, all the walls I'd built in the night crumbled. I cried. Oh, I cried right there against his chest. The tears came hot and fast, leaving wet streaks on his expensive wool coat. He held me tighter, rocking me like he used to when we were children, when the world felt cruel and he was the only one I could lean on. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, pulling back just enough to look at me. His eyes searched mine, frantic. "Why, Mary? What happened? Why didn't you call me? I shook my head, words catching in my throat. I didn't want to bother you. I didn't want to be a burden. At that he let out a sound, a mix between a laugh and a sob. A burden? To me? After all you did for me when we were young? Don't you dare say that. His voice was fierce, but his hands trembled as they gripped mine. He looked around at the others huddled beneath the bridge. They had turned quiet, watching us with tired, knowing eyes. He swallowed hard, then turned back to me. You're coming with me, he said. Right now. No arguments. I wanted to resist. Pride still clung stubbornly, whispering that I didn't belong in his world, that I had no place among chandeliers and velvet drapes. But my body betrayed me, weak and shaking from the cold. I couldn't even rise without his arm bracing me. So I let him lead me out from under that bridge. The morning light was blinding after the darkness. Snow stretched across the city in a hard white sheet, glittering beneath the pale sun. He guided me carefully, his gloved hand steady around mine, his other arm carrying the bags he had brought for the others. Sam, I whispered, my voice small. What will they think? The people here. They need you. He glanced back, his eyes soft. They'll get what I brought. And I'll be back. But you're my sister. I can't leave you here. Not another second. I didn't argue after that. My legs could barely keep up, but his strength carried me forward step by step, out of the shadows of the bridge and into the day. As we reached his car, a sleek black thing that looked far too fine for a street lined with cracked pavement, I paused. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. A weary old woman, hair wild, cheeks hollow, eyes still wet with tears. I didn't belong beside that car, didn't belong in his world. But Samuel opened the door and looked at me the way he always had when we were children, like I was the only family he had, the one he would protect no matter what. Please, he said softly, let me take care of you now. And so with trembling hands I climbed inside. As the car pulled away, I looked back once, just once, at the bridge receding in the distance. The figures beneath it grew smaller, fading into shadows. I thought of the woman who had given me soup, of the voices humming a hymn in the dark. They had given me kindness when I had nothing. But now, by some miracle, my brother had found me. I pressed my hands into my lap, still shaking, and whispered a prayer of thanks. Not for wealth, not for luxury, but simply for this. That family had found me when I thought I was lost forever. The ride to Samuel's home felt like stepping into a dream I wasn't sure I belonged in. I sank into the soft leather seat of his car, my body trembling from the cold and from disbelief. My brother's hands gripped the steering wheel tight, his jaw set as though he was holding back a storm of words. Every so often he glanced at me, his eyes full of worry. I kept my gaze fixed on the snowy streets outside, too ashamed to meet his eyes for long. The city rolled past in flashes, brick storefronts dusted with frost, the glowing signs of diners, the gray blur of pedestrians hurrying through the bitter morning. Then slowly the streets widened. Small houses gave way to larger ones, porches wrapped in garlands and wreaths, driveways shoveled clean. The farther we drove, the grander the homes became. I felt smaller with each passing block, like a ragged sparrow carried into a hall of swans. Finally, we turned onto a long winding drive flanked by tall iron gates. They swung open at our approach and I caught my breath. Beyond them stretched Samuel's estate. Wide lawns blanketed in snow, trees trimmed and tall, the kind of place you only see in magazines left in the doctor's office. And then the house itself came into view. It wasn't a house, not really. It was a mansion, 3 stories of stone and glass, its windows glowing with warm light against the winter sky. Columns framed the entryway. Wreaths hung from doors taller than any I had ever seen. The sight of it stole the air from my lungs. Sam, my voice cracked. This is where you live. He shot me a glance, almost guilty. It's just a house, Mary. Just a house. To him, maybe. To me, it was another world. When we pulled up to the front, the doors opened before we even reached them. A man in a dark suit hurried out, coatless despite the cold, his shoes crunching on the snow. He opened my door with a small bow. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. Mississippi." His voice was clipped, polite. I hesitated, clutching my worn coat tight around me. My boots left damp patches on the polished stone steps as Samuel guided me inside. The warmth hit me first soft, steady, wrapping me in comfort I hadn't felt in what seemed like years. Then came the sight. A chandelier sparkled above me, its crystals scattering light like stars. The floor gleamed, polished wood that reflected the glow of the roaring fireplace at the far end of the hall. Velvet drapes framed tall windows, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and something sweet, maybe cinnamon. My breath caught in my throat. I felt out of place more than I ever had in my life. My coat, thin and frayed at the cuffs, looked like an insult in such a space. My shoes, scuffed and wet, squeaked against the floor. I folded my arms as though trying to make myself smaller, less noticeable. "Mary," Samuel said gently, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You're safe here. This is your home now, too." I shook my head quickly. No. I can't stay here. Sam, look at me. I don't belong in a place like this." He turned me toward him, his eyes fierce. "You belong anywhere I am. Do you understand? You've always been there for me. Even when I had nothing. You'll stay here as long as you want." I wanted to argue, but the warmth of the fire drew me like a magnet. My legs trembled, my body heavy from exhaustion. I let him guide me into a grand sitting room, where I sank into a chair softer than any bed I'd slept on in years. The fabric embraced me, and for a moment, I nearly wept at the simple comfort of it. A woman entered, a housekeeper, I guessed. She carried a tray with a teapot, cups, and a plate of buttered rolls that steamed in the air. She set it on the table before me with a kind smile, as though it were nothing at all. "Please have some," Samuel urged. I reached for the cup with shaking hands. The tea was hot, fragrant, slipping warmth into me with each sip. The roll melted on my tongue, rich with butter. It was food, simple food, but after that night beneath the bridge it felt like a feast. Still, the shame lingered. I kept glancing at the gleaming wood, the velvet curtains, the portraits on the walls, all signs of a life I had no part in. "You shouldn't have to take care of me," I whispered. Samuel leaned forward, his hands clasped. "Don't you see, Mary? You did all this for me once. Every chance I ever had started because you believed in me. I'll not let you sit under a bridge while I have more than I need." Tears pricked my eyes again. His words filled the hollow spaces left by my son's betrayal, but they also stung, reminding me of how far I had fallen. I had lost my home, my place, my child. Now I sat in a palace, warm at last, yet still carrying the ache of everything I had lost. I leaned back in the chair, clutching the teacup in both hands, and let the fire warm me. For the first time in days I was safe. But safety is not the same as peace. Peace would take time and perhaps forgiveness, though I wasn't sure I had that left in me. Still, as I closed my eyes and listened to the crackle of the fire, I let myself breathe. Just breathe. I sat by the fire, the teacup warming my hands, while my brother studied me with the same sharp eyes he'd had since we were children. He was always the one to see through me, even when I tried to hide. I knew he wouldn't let the night pass without asking. When the housekeeper left us alone, he leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, voice steady but gentle. "Mary," he said, "tell me how this happened. Tell me why I found you under that bridge." I stared into the flames. The fire roared high, logs popping softly, but even its warmth couldn't ease the ache in my chest. The shame sat heavy in me. I didn't want to speak it aloud. Words made things real, and I had spent months pretending it wasn't. "I don't know where to begin," I whispered. Begin with him, Samuel said quietly. He didn't need to say the name. We both knew. I closed my eyes. My son's face rose in my mind. Not the man who had turned me out, but the boy I'd once held. A little boy with hair that stuck up in the mornings, with cheeks I'd kissed before school, with hands that reached for mine on icy sidewalks. He changed, I said, my voice breaking. It started small. He grew distant, quiet at first, then angry. I told myself it was work, stress, the weight of the world. But it wasn't. Samuel waited. He didn't rush me, didn't press. It was the cards, I went on. The poker. First, he told me it was just a game, just something with friends. But the games grew longer, the nights stretched on. Money started to vanish. Then came the shouting, the desperation. I tried to talk to him. Tried to remind him of the home, of his family, of everything we'd built. But he wouldn't listen. My fingers tightened around the cup. The china rattled against the saucer, so I set it down. One day, I whispered. He brought me papers. Said it was routine, said it was just to help with taxes. He put the pen in my hand. I didn't understand all the words, but I trusted him. He's my son. I signed. Samuel's jaw clenched. And what were those papers? The house, I said, the word barely a breath. He put it in his name. I didn't know. I didn't see it until it was too late. The fire crackled. My eyes blurred with tears, but I blinked them away. He told me later, I said. Told me I was nothing but a burden. That he needed the house, that I had no place there anymore. And then, my voice faltered. And then he told me to leave. Samuel leaned back, running a hand over his face. His eyes closed for a long moment, and when he opened them again, they were wet. You raised him, he said, his voice rough. You gave him everything. And his voice caught. He couldn't finish. I looked down at my lap. My hands trembled against the fabric of my coat. The hardest part, I whispered, wasn't losing the house. It was losing him. Losing the boy I thought I knew. Every mother believes her child will stand by her. I believed that to my bones. But when he looked at me, Sam, there was nothing. No love. Just cold. For a moment, the only sound was the fire. Then Samuel rose suddenly, pacing in front of the hearth. His fists clenched and unclenched. I'll fix this, he said sharply. I'll call my lawyers tonight. I'll hire the best detective if I have to. He won't get away with this, Mary. He won't. I shook my head weakly. What's done is done. Let it be. He stopped pacing, turned to me, his eyes fierce. No. Don't you dare say that. You saved me once, Mary. Don't think I've forgotten. When I was a boy with nothing but dreams, you were the one who scraped and worked so I could have shoes on my feet, books for school, a chance to leave that little house behind. You believed in me before anyone else did. And now you think I'll stand by while he treats you like this? Never. His words hit me hard. I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting back a sob. Sam, I whispered, I never wanted to trouble you. You have your own life, your own world. I didn't want to step into it with my broken pieces. He came back to me, knelt by my chair, and took my hands in his. His grip was steady, warm, full of the strength I no longer had. You're not a burden, he said firmly. You are my sister. And I will not rest until this is set right. Tears spilled down my cheeks then. Not just for the pain, but for the hope that flickered for the first time since that bitter night on the porch. I leaned into the warmth of the fire, into the steady strength of my brother's hands, and let myself believe, just a little, that maybe the story wasn't over yet. Samuel wasted no time. That very night, after I had confessed everything, he was already on the phone. I sat by the fire, the steam from my tea curling softly, while his voice carried down the hall firm, clipped, the voice of a man used to getting things done. First thing in the morning, I heard him say, lawyers, and a detective. I want signatures verified. Bank records traced. If there's fraud, I want proof. I shivered, not from cold but from fear. For so long I had tried to hide, to shrink away, to avoid the truth of what my son had done. Saying it aloud had nearly broken me. Now Samuel was dragging it into the light. By morning, the house was alive with movement. Men in dark suits arrived with briefcases, their polished shoes clicking across the marble floor. A woman with sharp glasses spread papers across the dining table, while another man flipped open a laptop, his fingers flying. Samuel introduced them as his legal team. "Don't be afraid," he whispered to me. "They're here for you." But I was afraid. To me, lawyers had always belonged to another world, the kind of people who spoke in terms I could never follow, whose time cost more than I made in a month. Now they looked at me with professional calm, asking questions that made my heart ache. "When did you first notice your son's gambling? Can you recall the date you signed these papers? Did anyone witness the conversation?" I answered as best I could, my voice trembling. Each word felt like pulling threads from an old quilt, unraveling everything I had tried to hold together. Then came the detective, a tall man with a quiet manner, his eyes sharp but kind. He laid out his plan gently, like one might to a nervous patient. "We'll start with the documents," he said. "Check for forgery, handwriting inconsistencies. Then we'll trace the money. Poker debts leave trails, and your son hasn't been careful." I lowered my eyes, shame washing over me. "He was my boy," I whispered. "I trusted him." The detective's voice softened. "That's what mothers do. Don't blame yourself for his betrayal." The days that followed blurred together. The estate, so quiet before, now bustled with comings and goings, lawyers, assistants, investigators. Papers were scanned, signatures compared. Calls were made to banks, casinos, realtors. Bit by bit, the truth unfolded. The forged documents were uncovered first. My son had slipped them in among routine tax forms, his signature neat and practiced, mine shaky with trust. Experts confirmed what I already feared. He had altered dates, falsified notarizations. My house, my life's work, had been stolen on paper long before he turned me out. Then came the debts. The detective laid them out on the table. Bank withdrawals, transfers to shady accounts, checks cashed at casinos. My son's name tied to them all. He had borrowed money from dangerous men, gambled it away, lost more than I could imagine. I sat in silence as the evidence piled higher. Each sheet of paper was a dagger. This was not the boy I had raised. The child who once cried over a broken toy, who promised me as a teenager he'd make me proud. This was a man who had sold his own mother's roof to cover his losses. One evening, Samuel came into the sitting room where I sat by the fire. He carried a folder thick with papers. His face was grave, but his eyes held a spark of triumph. "It's all here," he said, laying the folder in my lap. "Proof of the forgery. Records of his debts. Witness statements from his poker circle. Mary, we've got him." I touched the folder with trembling fingers. The weight of it seemed heavy, not just with paper but with truth. "What will happen now?" I asked. "We take him to court," Samuel replied. "We show the judge everything. You'll get your house back. He won't be able to hide behind lies anymore." I stared into the fire. The flames leapt high, crackling against the logs. Court. The very word made me feel small. I pictured myself standing before a judge, my voice shaking, my son's eyes burning with anger. Could I do it? Could I face him? Samuel knelt beside me, his hand covering mine. "You won't be alone," he said firmly. "I'll be there. The lawyers, the detective, everyone. All you have to do is tell the truth." Tears filled my eyes. "The truth," I whispered. "The truth is that I loved him. That's the hardest part." Samuel's face softened. And that's what makes you strong enough to do this. The house fell quiet after he left, but I sat by the fire long into the night, staring at the folder in my lap. It was full of facts, records, evidence. But what it truly held was the story of my son's betrayal. I pressed a hand to my heart, whispering a prayer. Not for revenge, not even for victory, but for courage. Because soon I would have to stand in the light of justice, with nothing but the truth to carry me. The morning of the trial dawned gray and cold, the kind of weather that settles heavy on your shoulders. Samuel insisted I wear one of the fine coats from his wardrobe, soft wool, lined with silk. It was far warmer than my old one, but as I fastened the buttons, I felt like a child playing dress-up. "This isn't about appearances," Samuel said firmly when he saw me fussing in the mirror. "It's about truth. And you, Mary, carry more truth than anyone else in that courtroom." We drove into the city in silence. My hands trembled in my lap, and Samuel stayed steady on the wheel, his jaw tight. When we arrived, the courthouse loomed above us, all columns and stone, the kind of place meant to make ordinary people feel small. And it worked. I felt like a speck, an old woman swept into a world too big for her. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polish and paper. We walked down long halls where our footsteps echoed. My lawyers met us at the courtroom door, their suits crisp, their faces serious. One of them squeezed my arm and whispered, "You're going to do fine. Just tell your story." The doors opened. I stepped inside. There he was. My son. He sat at the defendant's table, his shoulders hunched, his jaw clenched tight. For a moment I saw the boy he had once been, the child who used to fall asleep on my lap during thunderstorms, the teenager who once promised he'd take care of me when I grew old. But the man who looked back at me now was a stranger. His eyes were sharp, almost bitter. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He looked at me the way you look at someone who's standing in your way. I sank into my chair at the front, my knees trembling. Samuel sat behind me, a steady presence. His hand touched my shoulder briefly, strong and reassuring, before the judge entered. "All rise," the bailiff said. The trial began. The lawyers spoke first. My son's attorney painted him as a desperate man trying to make ends meet, claiming he had every right to the house. He called me confused, forgetful, suggested I had misunderstood the papers I signed. Each word cut deep. To hear myself described as a burden in legal terms was worse than hearing it at home. Then it was our turn. My lawyer laid out the evidence, the forged documents, the bank records, the poker debts. Each piece landed like a stone. The detective testified about the trail of money, the lies, the desperation. And then it was my turn. I rose slowly, leaning on the wooden rail for balance, and walked to the stand. My heart pounded so hard I feared the whole room could hear it. The clerk swore me in. My hand shook as I promised to tell the truth. "Mrs. Thompson," my lawyer began gently, "can you tell us in your own words what happened?" I took a deep breath. My eyes flicked to my son. His jaw clenched tighter, his eyes narrowing, but I forced myself to look forward. "I am a mother," I began, my voice quivering. "I raised that boy with everything I had. I worked, I saved, I went without so he could have shoes, books, a future. I trusted him. When he asked me to sign papers, I signed because he was my son. I believed him. But those papers were lies. They took my house, the home where I raised him, where I laid his father to rest. And when he had it in his name, he turned to me and said I was nothing but a burden. He told me to leave." The courtroom was silent. My throat tightened, but I kept going. I walked out into the snow that night. I had nowhere to go. I am not a rich woman. I had no strength to fight. I ended up beneath a bridge. That is where my brother found me. That is why I am here. Not for money, not for revenge, but because the truth matters. Because no mother should be betrayed like this. My voice broke on the last word. Tears blurred my vision, but I held steady. When I finished, the judge nodded gently, and my lawyer stepped back. My son's attorney rose for cross-examination, his tone sharp, his questions designed to twist my words. Mrs. Thompson, isn't it true you sometimes forget things? Misplace them? Yes, I said firmly, like any woman my age. But I don't forget the night my own son told me to leave. He pressed harder. And isn't it true you signed those papers willingly? I looked him square in the eye. I signed them because I trusted my son. Trust is not consent to betrayal. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. By the time I stepped down from the stand, my legs were weak, but Samuel caught me, steadying me back into my seat. He whispered, "You were perfect." The rest of the trial moved quickly. The evidence was undeniable. My son's debts, his forged papers, his lies, all laid bare under the bright lights of the courtroom. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. The house belongs to Mrs. Thompson. The defendant is guilty of fraud. Restitution will be ordered. Case closed. My breath left me in a rush. I had won. Not just the house, not just the papers. I had won back my dignity. I turned then slowly to face my son. His eyes burned with anger, but I met them with steady resolve. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "You need to leave," I said. "Not just my house. My life. I cannot carry you anymore." It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Harder than labor, harder than burying my husband, harder than the cold night under that bridge. But it was the truth. And in that moment I felt free. That evening, back at his estate, he poured me a cup of tea and sat across from me by the fire. His eyes were kind but firm, like a man who had already made a decision. "Mary," he said softly, "I need to tell you something. That house, it's yours again now, but I don't think you should keep it." I frowned. "Sam, it's all I have left. My whole life is in those walls." He nodded. "I know. But it's also the place where your son broke you, where his lies lived. Every time you open that door, you'll feel it. You deserve a home without shadows." I sipped my tea in silence. He was right, though it hurt to admit it. The thought of walking those familiar halls again, knowing the betrayal that had taken root there, made my chest heavy. Samuel leaned forward, his voice softening. "So I have a gift for you. A real gift." I shook my head quickly. "No, Sam. You've done enough already. You saved me." He reached for my hand, covering it with his strong one. "Mary, listen. When we were young and poor, you were the one who scraped every penny, who made sure I had shoes, books, a chance. You believed in me when nobody else did. Without you, I wouldn't be here. And now it's my turn." I looked up at him, my eyes wet. "What have you done?" He smiled, a rare tender smile. "The estate. This house. It's yours now, Mary. I put it in your name." I gasped, shaking my head. "No, Sam, I couldn't." "You can. And you will," he said firmly. "Because it's not charity. It's thanks. And because I want you to have peace for the rest of your days." As if that weren't enough, he pulled out a folder, much like the one that had held the evidence against my son. Inside was a simple statement of numbers, so many zeros I couldn't make sense of them. $2 million, he said softly. "Set aside for you. Enough that you'll never want for anything again." The words knocked the air from my chest. I covered my mouth with my hands, tears spilling freely now. "Sam," I whispered, "why would you do all this for me?" He squeezed my hand, his eyes shining. "Because you're my sister. Because family is supposed to take care of one another. And because once upon a time you gave everything you had to me. Now it's my turn." I couldn't speak after that. I just leaned forward and held him, my younger brother who had grown into the kind of man the world rarely sees. For the first time in a long while my heart felt light. I had lost so much, But through him, I found more than I ever dreamed I'd have again. Spring came slowly that year, as though the earth itself had been holding its breath all winter. Snow melted in patches, revealing soft green shoots pushing bravely through the soil. From the tall windows of Samuel's estate, the estate that was now mine, I watched the world thaw and felt something thaw inside me too. For weeks after the court case, I moved carefully, as if each day might shatter. I had lived too long on edge, too long braced for the next loss. But slowly I began to trust the quiet again. The fire in the hearth became familiar, not a luxury. The soft sheets on my bed felt less like borrowed comfort and more like home. I still thought of my son. A mother always will, no matter how deep the hurt. Sometimes I saw him in my dreams, the small boy he once was, his hand clutching mine. I would wake with tears on my cheeks, but I did not let the sorrow swallow me. Some things we cannot mend no matter how we wish to, and that too is part of living. Instead, I poured my heart into new rhythms. I walked the gardens in the mornings, the dew sparkling on the grass. I baked in the grand kitchen, filling it with the smells of cinnamon bread and apple pies. Scents that reminded me of the small house I once called home. The staff Samuel had hired treated me with warmth, but I made sure to sit at the table with them, not above them. I knew too well what it felt like to be invisible. And then one bright afternoon I sat on the wide porch, a quilt across my lap, and I felt at peace. Not the kind that comes from riches or walls of stone, but the kind that settles deep in the chest when you know you are safe, when you know you are loved. I whispered a thank you then. Not just to Samuel, though he deserved more thanks than I could ever give, but to God, to life itself, for second chances, for brothers who remember, for the strength to stand again after being knocked down. I may have lost a son, but I gained back myself. I gained back dignity. And in Samuel I found proof that family, when true, can heal even the deepest wounds. Now, as the seasons turn, I do not look back in bitterness. I look forward with gratitude. My life is not over, it has only begun again. And this time I will live it with joy. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.